Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, there needs to be a bit of an introduction here. I am an Israeli for the last 30 years. I made Aliyah to Israel in December of 1982, so it's almost my birthday, 30 years. But I grew up in Australia. I did a postdoc in Canada. My eldest son was born in Canada but lives in Ireland. My daughter is currently travelling in Bangalore and my son is in Kenya. My wife is in Haifa, as far as I know. Okay, so I'm here to talk to you a bit about innovation in India. And one of I've started with a picture of an Indian worker in the field holding a mobile phone. One of the fascinating facts about India, and perhaps this shouldn't come as a surprise, but in India there are more mobile phones than there are toilets. The mobile phone has penetrated to such a degree in India and in most of the developing world that it's a platform for innovation and a platform for advancing the development of these countries in a way that's hard to believe. So we start with the man in the fields with the mobile phone. I'll talk to you, I've called this a personal perspective because the basis on which the organisers invited me to talk here is the fact that I've spent 2.5 years out of the last 3.5 years in Bangalore. I work for IBM Israel, and I spent almost 3 years working for IBM India in their research lab in Bangalore. I'm a researcher, I'm a scientist. I'm not exactly a venture capitalist in any sense of the word. I am also very closely tied with European research, in the sense that most of my research at IBM since about 1999 has been funded by the European FP7 program, and that includes some of the research that I did in India, because FP7 also funds Indian companies. And if people are thinking of making research proposals and starting research consortia and starting businesses along with India, then I'm happy to say that it's quite possible, quite feasible, and very interesting proposition. Again, I'm going to talk from a personal perspective because I don't know much about innovation in India except from my own, experiences, and I'll tell you a bit about my experiences. But before I do that, I wanted to acknowledge a person called Navi Raju, who is a Vice President and Principal Analyst for Forrester Research. And he put a presentation on the internet called Innovation in India. And I have stolen his first 2 slides. Without any lack of shame, I stole his first 2 slides. If you really want to find out about innovation in India, go to Google the guy, find the slides and read them, because they're much more impressive, much more informative than anything I'm going to say. The guy from Forrester Research knows his business. And he starts with this particular slide, that once upon a time, in about 1500, it's not that long ago, India was one of the highest producing GDPs in the world. India and China were way ahead of Europe. Europe was languishing in the doldrums from the Middle Ages, the Renaissance hadn't started yet, and India and China were the global economic engines. They produced spices, they produced silks, they produced incredible amounts of wealth based on their natural resources, based on their position geographically in very nice places. They were massively powerful economically about 500 years ago. And then the British came. And they managed to take most of that wealth and remove it to Europe. The British, the French, the Portuguese, and various other colonial powers managed to take the Indians back to the Stone Age, more or less. To the point where, at the beginning of this century, 1913, India had a gross domestic product that was half that of the USA, and it's still way, way behind. But on the other hand, it's ceded its crown as a global economic giant, but it's attempting to regain it. And one of the things that is terribly impressive about India is the fact that it's a culture of youth. One of the main reasons that I came home from India is because I can no longer get a work permit in India. I would have been there still now if I hadn't turned 58, which is the retirement age in India. 58, yeah. It's a country of young people. And if you want to get a working visa, you want to be a foreigner working in India, you can't do it after the age of 58. So that's the reason why I'm back here in Israel, or one of them. There are others. I mean, I do like Israel, and my family is here, and I'm a big Zionist as well. But honestly, working in India is a pleasure, and if it weren't for the Indian government, I might still be there. But anyway, let's go back to this slide. India is attempting to bring back its former glories in the sense that its development is accelerating, and by 2050, if you put India together with China, they'll be way ahead of Europe and the United States. And there's also an interesting remark. I mean, the Indians often compare themselves with the Chinese. And there are two significant differences between the Chinese as a global economic leader and the Indians as potential economic leaders. The first is that India is the largest democracy in the world. For democracy, you can translate that into the Hebrew word balagan. It's very confusing. It's a society that's not easy to move in one direction in the same way that the Chinese society is easy to put, 10,000 workers together and they'll build the Olympic Stadium in a matter of 3 months. It can't be done in India. The road from the centre of Bangalore to Bangalore airport took years to build. I mean, they were starting to build it when I arrived, and 2.5 years later it was barely finished. The same with the Bangalore Underground. Infrastructure projects there are very slow because of the corruption, because of the democracy, because of the fact that they have to, take care of environmental concerns. They're slow but steady. It's the elephant versus the dragon. And sooner or later, my personal belief is that the elephant will overtake the dragon, because the Indian economy is a youth economy. They have a huge growth rate. They have a demographic which is, 70% or something under the age of 30. And in China, that's not the case. China is going to suffer eventually from the one-child policy. Eventually, the Chinese demographic will make the Chinese into an old and aging society, just like Europe is now. And India will not suffer from that. And my bet for the long term, if I had to buy long-term government bonds, I would buy Indian over Chinese. But that's enough, sort of from the global perspective and philosophy. Let's go back to the personal perspective. Oh, no, one more slide. This is not by the Forrester Guide, this is my own. Just to give you some idea of the scale. India has 1.2 or 1.3 billion people. It was 1.2 yesterday, it's probably 1.3 today. It's 3.3 million square miles, and there are 21 official languages, but there are probably 121 unofficial languages. It's culturally extremely diverse. The difference between the north of India and the south of India is like the difference between Norway and Malta. Not just geographically, but also culturally. The difference in the culture between the people of Kashmir, half of whom are Muslims and half of whom are Buddhists, the people of central India, the Ganges Plains, who are 90% Hindus, the people of the south who speak an entirely different language, they look entirely different, they have a different mentality. The people around Bangalore, which is where I was situated, are southern Indians. They have a different diet, they have a different language, it's like totally different to Delhi. And you have to be aware of that. You can't really talk about one India. Talking about India is like talking about Europe, much more so than talking about the United States. The United States and Europe are each 3 times larger geographically than India, and they have a quarter of the population. So that, you know, the comparison is somewhat interesting, I think. You know, the fact that I've put a question mark after one language in America because I think that's probably not true. There are many, many languages spoken in North America, but there's one dominant language and there's one dominant means of communication. Spanish, yeah. In India, they're united by English, which is very interesting, that they have this foreign language that was brought in by the British. So despite destroying their economy, the British also did some wonderful things for India. They created a railway system that works. They bought a unifying language. They did a lot of good stuff as well, but ultimately they destroyed the economy. Now let's go to the personal stuff. Okay, me, what did I do? I arrived just as the global financial crisis started. I landed in India in July 2008, and I stayed there until February 2011. The global financial crisis had almost no effect on India. The only thing they did was cancel our Christmas party. The high-tech world in India was booming and continued to boom and will continue to boom independent of whatever happens in the rest of the world. That was my feeling at the time. You know, just so as not to look too extravagant or too ostentatious, IBM India cancelled the Christmas party because of the global financial crisis, but everything else went on perfectly as normal. They were hiring people at a terrific rate. The expansion of the high-tech companies in India is phenomenal. You know, here in Israel and in North America, IBM is static at best and sometimes declining in numbers. The numbers in India are, the recruitment of people to IBM India is so hard, so strong, they have to do, you know, optical character recognition of resumes because they can't read all the resumes they have to get through in order to interview the people, in order to put them online in the service business that's growing in India. I think I'm allowed to say this, but if I'm not, then you didn't hear it. But actually, India is the country with the largest number of IBM employees in the world. There are more IBM employees in India than in the United States. It's a huge company that's built on the delivery of IT services. But not only that, they also have a research division, they also have a software division, they build hardware in India. The IBM Global Corporation very soon will be an Indian-based corporation. And that's also true of Microsoft, it's also true of Google, it's also true of Motorola, it's also true of General Electric. All of these huge multinational companies are stopping to employ people in the expensive countries and starting to employ people in India. And there's a reason for that. It's because the Indians are well educated once you get above a certain level. The Indians speak English and they perform well in the global market, especially in the world of IT and in the world of IT services, but in other industries as well. I'm going to say a little bit in my talk about the high-tech parks in Bangalore where I worked. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the universities in India, because part of my position in India was to do with university relations and to do with developing the area of service science. A little bit about innovation for India, what sorts of innovations. If the companies in Israel or the innovators out there in the audience want to produce things that sell in the Indian market, then I'll have one slide that will interest you. What interested me was innovation in India, what the Indians are doing in India that's innovative. And I'll finish with a slide which I've called Where To Next. It's sort of, a bit of publicity for what I think is the next stage. So let's start with the high-tech parks. Well, before we start with the high-tech parks, let's just talk about Bangalore itself. Bangalore is one of the nicest cities in the world. It's situated practically on the equator, maybe 5 or 6 degrees north, but it's at an elevation of 1,000 meters, so the climate is perfect. For 2.5 years, I never closed my windows. Not once. I never wore a sweater. I never changed out of sandals. For 2.5 years. There is no winter, there is no summer, it's just really pleasant all year round. The high-tech centre in Bangalore is a response to the historical situation of, first of all, the British Army headquarters that were there. Winston Churchill spent most of the First World War in Bangalore. And consequent to the British garrison in Bangalore, the Indian aerospace industry developed in Bangalore. The aerospace industry of India is quite advanced. They build their own helicopters, they build their own aeroplanes, and they've been doing it for many years. And around that atmosphere of aerospace and defence, and also a phenomenally powerful university called the Indian Institute of Science, which was founded by the Tatars about 100 years ago, centred around that educational and aerospace and defence hub. The IT companies came about 15 or 20 years ago. And if you look at this, the picture on the bottom is Embassy Golf Links business park. That's a business park in Bangalore, one of the 3 main ones, by no means the biggest, but it's at least, I would say, 10 times larger than Matam in Haifa. It's an enormous park full of all of the names that I mentioned before. IBM, Microsoft, Motorola, Hewlett-Packard, you name it, they're all there. Google are in a separate park. They don't like to sit with all the rest of the industries, but all of the multinationals do their research and development in Bangalore, as well as their service industries. Manyata is a new park that's maybe 4 times larger than Embassy Golf Links, and Electronic City is another one of the well-established parks. Each of these parks is 10 to 15 times larger than any high-tech park in Israel, and houses thousands upon thousands of R&D workers, many of whom are very low-paid and well educated. So it's a threat, in a way, to the Israeli high-tech industry. We're also very skillful, but we're no longer low-paid. When IBM set up its research lab in Haifa 40 years ago, Israeli researchers were low-paid. It was a good investment for IBM 40 years ago to set up the research lab in Haifa. IBM is now setting up research labs in Nairobi and in Rio de Janeiro. Even India is getting to be expensive. The interesting thing about IBM's research policy is that they try and move now to emerging markets. The latest lab to open was in Nairobi, and that's also an indication of where IBM feels is the future, in Africa now. So that's the high-tech parks where I work. They look absolutely immaculate. If you're inside the high-tech park, it's exactly as though you were in Southern California. The trees, the buildings, the neatness, the cleanliness. High-tech parks in Bangalore are just like Southern California, but just outside the gate is India. India is, as I was saying before, Balagan, it's a mess. There is, outrageous traffic, outrageous filth and mess. And the rest of Bangalore looks like this. It's only the high-tech parks that look like Southern California, and you only have to take one step outside the boundaries of the high-tech park to be here. So that's an interesting sidelight. You know, India is very tiered. You know, there are the very wealthy and the very rich and the very clean, and there's also the very poor and the very dirty and the very squalid. And you have to, if you're in India, you have to get used to both of those. It's very easy to get used to the easy life. You know, when you move to India and all of a sudden I had a beautiful apartment in a lovely neighbourhood that was the equivalent of Tsahala. It was called Defence Colony in Bangalore. A leafy suburb with huge trees and palms, and every house has a guard outside, and you don't drive a car, you have to have a car with a driver. I had a driver for 3 years. You know, it's an easy life and very nice weather. But alongside that, you have to live with the rest of India. The universities in India are a similar story to a certain extent. The universities in India, there are some fantastic schools. The Indian Institute of Science, which I mentioned before, the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad is one of the top business schools in the world. The IITs, the Indian Institutes of Technology in Delhi, Madras, and various other places, produce incredibly high-level engineers. But after the top level of Indian universities, then you come to the university just outside the back gate. This is the MS Ramaiah Institute in Bangalore, which is a second-rate university, and there are a huge number of second-rate universities, and you have to be careful when you're employing Indian engineers, where you get them from. So that's my next sort of cautionary tale, that there are wonderful people in India, and there is, you know, the best of times and the worst of times. The innovation for India, if you want to produce stuff for the Indian market, it has to be cheap. It has to be mass-produced, and it has to be available to the large buying public. You know, the big successes of Indian innovation are this Jaipur foot. This is a prosthetic device invented in India that you can put on somebody who's lost their leg for a matter of you know, a few dollars. It has no shoe, it can't be attached in any special way, but it works, and it's an invention of India, and it works for India, and it makes an enormous number of people much better off. The Tata Nano is a well-established Indian invention. This is the $2,500 family sedan. This is for all the middle-class Indians. It's made of rubber and plastic and put together with glue, but it works. And nobody else has even tried to produce a $2,500 car. But Tata has done it, and done it very well. The detergent I put here is an invention of India, where they provide a sachet of shampoo or detergent for half a rupee. Now, there are about 10 rupees to the shekel. So that's a 20th of a shekel. You can get a piece of shampoo that you can wash your hair in the street. These are the kinds of products that are for poor people, and nobody else would produce this kind of, you know, small packets of shampoo and detergent for the masses who need it, because they wash their hair in the street. So this is an example of the kinds of mass market products that are needed in India. I need to finish up, I see. I'm not going to talk about the innovation that I did in India, where we talked about service design and service provision of IT services. This was some research that we did in order to make the IBM service provision more efficient. And I'm going to finish with my ad for the International Conference on Services in Emerging Markets, which starts next week in Mysore. This is a conference which specialises in understanding emerging markets. It's the 3rd edition of it. It happens every year, and if you can't go this year, then try and get there next year. I want to thank you for your attention, and you know, I don't know if there's time for questions, but I'm happy to answer them. I'll be here all day.